What's up, guys? UFC 309 just wrapped up, and the card was good, especially the prelims, right? I think it outperformed the main card, in my opinion. Those fights were excellent. A lot of good performances, exciting fights, but the main card had, the Bo Nickal and Paul Craig fight wasn't great. The Araujo and Silva fight was horrid. The main event wasn't, it was expected. It went just like everyone thought it was going to go. Stipe was old, he was slow, he couldn't cover the distance to land on Jones, and he retired after, which is great. He came back, he got a big payday, retiring as the greatest heavyweight of all time. That's great for him. But Jon Jones made the fight look easy. He almost finished him in the first round. He was very patient. It looked like in moments he was just letting Stipe getting off shots, not to land, but it looked like he didn't want to finish the fight in moments where he could have, or he could have landed bigger shots than he was, but eventually finished the fight with a spinning back kick to the body. Landed on the ribs, it looked like, dropped Stipe, it was over from there. Jones looked really good. He looked really, really good. That side kick into the trip was some high level stuff. But enough with the shenanigans, dude. Enough with the elder beatings. It has to be Tom Aspinall next. And they kept calling Jon Jones the undisputed champion. He's the disputed champion because there's an interim champion in the same weight class. And they didn't even bring in Tom Aspinall into the cage either. That's actually kind of a bummer, That's the fight that needs to be next. That's the only fight left for Jon Jones. And Jones says he's probably not going to retire. He says he's still going to fight. And man, it was sad watching Stipe throwing combinations from distance, trying to land on Jones, and Jones just moving away. Stipe landed a couple shots, but even when he landed, it looked like he didn't hurt Jones at all. He just didn't have any speed in his punches at all to deliver with that power. So, not much to say about the main event other than that. And Jones should be fighting Tom Aspinall. That's the fight that always should have happened. And as for Stipe, of course, he retired. Then we go to the best fight on the entire card. Charles Oliveira defeats Michael Chandler by decision. What a fight this was. First time Charles went 5 rounds. First time he ever went past the 3rd round in his career. Cardio looked good, so that question is answered by Oliveira. And he was new and improved. Better striking than ever. Better striking defense other than the 5th round. He got caught there and rocked, and then back of the head shots. Michael Chandler's the dirtiest fighter in UFC history. But wrestling, Charles Oliveira is the new mythical fighter. Bro out-wrestled Michael Chandler easily. You see the way he was getting those takedowns from distance, shooting in, knee tapping him, and power halving him while he had his back? You can definitely tell Charles Oliveira was wrestling a lot for this camp. And maybe just after the Armin fight, because that was the difference of their fight. Armin was the better wrestler. Charles made the adjustments to become a better wrestler so that never happens to him again. And now that he can offensively wrestle with some of the best wrestlers in the sport, can we also talk about Chandler cheating throughout the whole fight? Like, I thought with the Dustin fight, it was a one-off. He cheated a bunch against Dustin. But now here against Charles, he poked him in the eye, grabbed the fence multiple times, grabbed the gloves multiple times, and landed like 20 back of the head shots right in front of Keith Peterson. Dominic Cruz is definitely right about Keith. Bro was probably drunk because he was standing above Charles, seeing all the shots landing to the back of the head and didn't do a thing about it. No warning, no point deduction, no disqualification. All of those would have been reasonable. And the fact that Charles survived all of that punishment to the back of the head while rocked and still able to win the fight after shows that his chin is better than ever, somehow. He does look physically bigger, so I think it helps him take a punch better. He was bigger than Chandler in there. For a former 145er, that is kind of insane. But that allowed him to take a lot of shots from Chandler, who is notoriously one of the most explosive and powerful punchers in the lightweight division, but still able to win after that is a testament to his toughness and durability and his heart, right? With that whole old narrative about Charles always used to quit. Charles is absolutely no quitter at all. What a performance by Charles Oliveira. That, in my opinion, is the best performance Oliveira's ever had in his career. That was a flawless performance until the 5th round. And I think he should get the next title shot after Islam fights Armin, right? Because Charles, he did lose to Armin, but it was a very close fight. And there's no other contender ready to fight Islam, right? Charles should be the next in line now after Islam fights Armin early next year. And the rematch with Islam, hopefully now, it can finally happen. Because I think this is the best version of Islam versus the best version of Charles. I don't think when they first fought each other, that was them at their best. I think now they're both at their best. Who do I pick in an early prediction? I think Islam would still win, but I think it would be a very competitive fight, right? This is a much more measured and intelligent Charles Oliveira, who's not going to rush forward landing big shots or trying to land big shots, just like he tried against Islam in their first fight. Look at the way he fought Chandler. Very composed, fighting at range, intelligent distance management. That's the way he has to fight Islam as well to do well against him. So Charles versus Islam or Armin should be the next fight. Oh, actually, if Armin beats Islam, there's going to be an immediate rematch. So Islam is most likely to win. That should be the fight for Charles. But let's say if Armin does beat Islam and they rematch for their trilogy, essentially, which is crazy to think about that. If Arman beats Islam, there's a trilogy between them. Then you could do Charles versus Max Holloway, right? Max said that he wants to fight Charles for the BMF title. Charles said he'd love that, so that'd be a great fight as well. And as for Michael Chandler, do the Conor fight, I guess, if Conor's ever going to fight. If not, he could fight maybe, Dustin, Justin, Colby, etc. There's a bunch of fighters he could go up against. Well, Colby's actually now fighting Joaquin Buckley, so maybe the winner of that could fight Chandler. That'd be cool. Then we go to back-to-back, probably the worst fights of the year, starting with Bo Nickal versus Paul Craig. This was a bathroom break worthy fight, but the name value kept us anticipated for the fight itself, right? And Hamzat would have slaughtered this guy in a fight. Dude, they need to slow down on his rise. He is not ready for the top 15. If he doesn't have the power to knock out Paul Craig, who's essentially like the same level of durability as Alistair Overeem was, and if his wrestling is not confident enough to wrestle with Paul Craig, or it struggles against Cody Brundage, and even Jamie Pickett needed to low blow him to take him to the ground, Bo Nickal needs a lot more time to build up to fight the top 15. He was landing clean shots on Paul Craig, and only one time rocked him. And your striking has to be underwhelming if Paul Craig is getting confident striking with you. And there were moments where Bo Nickal was literally just staring down with him. They were like the two fighting game characters in the character select screen. They're both like facing off. That's what it looked like for most of that fight. They're just staring down at each other in their fighting stances. Everybody thought this was going to be a good fight where Bo Nickal was going to put on a good performance and show why he's one of the best prospects in the sport. But he got a hype train derailed in a way, or I guess delayed. His hype train has been delayed. He needs to get a lot better, especially in the striking. He didn't show great distance management. He was winging punches, reaching in. Paul Craig actually had better distance management, landing check left hooks, landing body kicks. It's just that Paul Craig has almost no defense at all. So not being able to land some shots on a guy who has one-dimensional defense and has no chin is crazy. Even the commentators were saying that Bo Nickal not wrestling with Paul Craig was a mistake. In hindsight, it may have been, but at the same time, he could have gotten submitted because Paul Craig, his striking is not good, right? But he has some of the best jiu-jitsu in the sport, especially from 185 and up. This is the same guy who submitted Magomed Ankalaev and the same guy who finished Jamal Hill on the ground too, and Nikita Krylov. Like, this guy has legit wins against high-level opponents when they go to the ground with him. And Bo Nickal, who's an amazing wrestler, maybe he's able to fight against Paul Craig well, but it is a risk. And it looked like he was confident going into the fight that he would outstrike Craig, but when the fight was playing out, his punches missing, him not hurting Paul Craig with most of the punches that he was landing, it seemed like his confidence started to go down throughout the fight. But at the same time, Paul Craig was not landing a lot of shots of his own, right? He landed some body kicks, some check left hooks, some elbows, which were nice, but it did look like Bo Nickal won the fight. And the UFC could not replicate what they did to Darren Till with this guy. Slow Bo Nickal down. Let him fight guys around that level of Paul Craig, and he will get better, right? He is only 7-0. And I know some people were saying, yeah, Hamzat would beat Bo Nickal because Hamzat has more fights. Bro, Hamzat, when he was 4-0, fighting Ikram Aliskerov, would have slaughtered Bo Nickal. When he fought John Phillips in his UFC debut, he was just as experienced as Bo Nickal is right now. That version of Hamzat would have beaten Bo Nickal. Like, Bo Nickal is a good prospect, but now that we all know, he is way overhyped. A next good fight for Bo Nickal, I would say, is maybe Mikhail Alexiachuk, which is a very difficult fight, right? That is a test, but it's not a top 15 opponent, and he's coming off a 3-fight loss streak. So then we go to the bathroom break where we talked about the stock market and Dogecoin. Not a fan of crypto, not a fan of Dogecoin, but there's a lot of significant gains in the stock market specifically, but a lot of defensive sellers. So, a lot of good fluid movement with also really good defensive counters from the sellers. And that entire discussion was way more exciting than watching Silva flopping takedowns, flailing to the ground, throwing slapping punches. Bro, slapping punches, how are those still in the sport? How are fighters still in the sport throwing punches like that? We're in the UFC here, right? This is the highest stage for MMA. This is the biggest organization in the world. And we still have fighters throwing slapping punches. Not in some kind of creative way. That's just how they throw punches. It's crazy, bro. No disrespect to Araujo. She fought well. It was mostly Karine Silva. How was this on the main card over Jim Miller? That was one of the sloppiest fights I've ever seen. Mostly from Karine Silva, right? Viviane Araujo, she was performing pretty well. Tough first round because Silva was just being super explosive with everything. She gassed herself out. And the takedowns were not even technical. She was literally trying to muscle Araujo to the ground, which is crazy to see, right? That's the kind of stuff you expect from heavyweights. Slapping punches, flopping takedowns, flailing to the ground on the back, like pulling guard out of exhaustion. Like, how was that on the main card, bro? They are not ready to fight Shevchenko. They are not ready to fight Grasso or any of those top fighters. Defeats Yantau by a decision, and man, did he perform. It's just that he slowed down, and it's understandable why. He fought a guy that was in like the next weight class. Mauricio Ruffy was essentially fighting a welterweight as a lightweight. He did weigh at 165 pounds, but that was after he was already cutting weight, right? But Mauricio Ruffy did look like he was a little hesitant in the first round, and I think it's because he was going up against a bigger opponent. He didn't want to make a mistake and get caught before feeling the timing of his opponent first. Once he got the timing of Yontop, that's where he started to go, landing the right hand, dropping him with the left hook. Such an amazing style that he has, man. It is an explosive style that's going to make him lose energy throughout the fight, but sniper-like right hands, clean left hooks, and as always, amazing footwork from Mauricio Ruffy, man. He performed, he looked really good, and really only getting caught because his opponent was able to tank so many shots and move forward with combinations, right? And that is a thing even with Conor McGregor, right? Ruffy and Conor have a similar style, so they're going to be one-shot guys. And if you're able to get past that one big shot of theirs, you can put together combinations as they're trying to reset. This is always a thing with snipers, right? You get past a sniper shot, they have to get ready for the next shot, and as they're preparing for that, that's when the opponent can put together combinations on them, right? This is something that Nate Diaz was able to do against Conor, and this is something that Yontop was able to do because he was able to take a lot of shots. So great performance by Mauricio Ruffy, and credit to Ruffy for taking the fight after when he didn't even need to. And credit to Yontop for taking the fight on short notice. He didn't have a training camp really, went in there, fought with Ruffy, who had so much hype to him, and did much better than most people thought he would. Cardio held up for 3 rounds, even without a training camp, and he was definitely overweight. Looked like he came out of a buffet. I mean, who's to blame him? You know, he wasn't even preparing for a fight at all. So credit to both fighters for taking the fight and actually making it really exciting. Not a one-sided beatdown the way most people thought that it was going to be, right? We all thought that it was going to be like a big finish, dominating performance for Ruffy, but Yontop showed, just like Romero earlier in the card, they aren't just going to be walked right through like that. Marcus McGee wins a decision 29-28 against Jonathan Martinez. That guy kicked so hard, man. McGee outkicked him like 3-1 before the third round, and then Martinez landed one big leg kick and completely compromised McGee for the rest of the round. The guy didn't have power in his punches anymore, could barely move around in the octagon, but it was too little too late for Martinez because he didn't do anything for 2 rounds. Like, he just stood there, landed a couple leg kicks for 2 rounds straight. He put himself in a position where he can only win by a knockout. And it wasn't because McGee was necessarily neutralizing his game or anything. He wasn't. But it wasn't only that. After Martinez hurt McGee with a leg kick, he went and clinched with him up against the fence. What is that? Did he think he was Mario Batista? Really questionable. I don't want to say game plan because it seems like his game plan was good. It's just the way he approached it and fought the fight. Right? The game plan is essentially what the coaches are telling him how to fight against McGee, but the way he actually fought was some low fight IQ stuff, if we're going to be completely honest. I mean, in no world do you leg kick someone, hurt them, and then clinch with them, and don't even fight for the first 2 rounds. That makes no sense. McGee was waiting a lot of times for Martinez to come forward with some shots and stuff, but he was able to put together combinations. Martinez was so defensive that a lot of those combos were not landing, and it made it a much more boring fight than it was expected. You know, a lot of people thought that this fight, as did I thought this fight was going to be amazing, but Martinez came out there looking like when he fought Jose Aldo, and honestly even more lackluster than that. He talked about against Jose Aldo he was starstruck, right? He was fighting a legend, a guy he looked up to. But it seems like that carried over into the McGee fight as well, until he started finally letting his hands go at the end of the second round, but it wasn't enough to win the round after all of the work that McGee put in the second round before that. So Marcus McGee gets another win, adding to his win streak. And he's a really humble guy. You know, I never knew his personality or listened to him in interviews and stuff, but he seems like a really cool guy. He's rising in the rankings. He's going to be higher up in the top 15, and at 34 years old. So he's going to have to climb that ladder a lot quicker, just so he doesn't lose his prime before he gets to his peak. And for his next fight, I would say Marcus McGee versus Kyler Phillips, or Rob Font, actually. Let's do Rob Font, who's number 9. Marcus McGee is probably going to be number, somewhere in the top 15. And I think it's a good step up in competition for McGee against someone who's going to mostly box with him. So stylistically, it should be an amazing fight, dude. The jabs from Rob Font, the distance boxing versus the pocket combinations of McGee. That's going to be a fun fight, man. And as for Martinez, you could do him versus Amin Zahabi or Montel Jackson. Both are also in the top 15. Both will be really interesting fights. And of course, it's Jim Miller who gets the arm and guillotine win. When's the last time a fighter won, in the lightweight division specifically, by an arm and guillotine? It's a legend like him that pulls it off. And Damon Jackson retired after. We thought that Jim Miller might have retired, with a good win here, but he wants to keep going. He wants to go to 50 wins. That's his goal now. Get 50 wins in the UFC. And he brought up a really good point. He said, even though he has the most fights and the most wins in UFC history, he doesn't even have the most, like, top 10 most decisions at lightweight. That's how often he finishes fights. He has the most wins and most fights, but it's not even top 10 with most decisions. And he looked amazing. Like, he's one of those fighters that just doesn't lose his touch. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is absolutely elite. Some of the best submissions in the game. His hands looked pretty good in this fight. Damon Jackson was kind of squared, standing in front of him at times, throwing out kicks, but Jim Miller was able to land a few left hands. Through another left hand, I believe, Damon Jackson went under for a single leg takedown and got guillotined right from there, and it was so fast. Like, once Jim Miller had the grip around the neck, he knew it was over. And he talked about that he had to figure out the guillotine for a long time in order to get it perfect. And he says now he's at a point in his skill level where he's able to squeeze on that guillotine for 5 minutes. That's ridiculous, man. A 5-minute squeeze to get a finish is insane. Do you know what would be an amazing fight for Jim Miller? Rafael dos Anjos. Both guys are legends, both on the tail ends of their careers, and a fight like that would be amazing. Or you can give him Tony Ferguson if Tony wants to still fight. David Onama beats Roberto Romero by a unanimous decision, 30-27. Even though this fight didn't end with a finish, it was one of the best fights on the card, man. They both got a knockdown against each other in the first round. Romero went out and showed that he is absolutely underrated. He took the fight on short notice, arrived on Thursday, 2 days before the fight, went in there and gave David Onama a fight, man. Dropped him in the first round by landing the right straight, continuing with the combination, left hand, right overhand. Then David Onama was able to fight his way back, had a standing darts choke. Then he dropped Romero after, making that round very competitive. I think Onama won that round, but there was some exciting stuff in the first round, man. Then Onama started to pull ahead as Romero was slowing down throughout the fight. He had very different kind of defense where he was squatting down to get away from punches, and Onama was putting together really good combinations of power punches, but Romero's chin held up for the entire fight. Absolutely give Romero another fight in the UFC. He absolutely deserves it, man. Amazing fight. Then Martin Tybura gets a TKO win, the first in like 3 years, against Jonathan Deniz. Pretty much just wrestled his way into a ground and pound finish, doctor stoppage. When the blobs get full mount is just different, right? It's really hard to get up from that. Deniz had good power, but not enough to knock out Tybura, and he didn't have the wrestling to stop the takedowns. Tybura full mounted him a few times throughout the fight, and then finally, in the second round, started to unload with ground and pound, right? Because Deniz initially was trying to hold on to Tybura, pulling him into himself so Tybura couldn't posture up and land elbows until he did. Jonathan Deniz needs to train with Derek Lewis so he can just stand up, right? In the heavyweight division, it's like two polar opposites. Either the full mount is the most dominant position on the ground for them, where they just cannot stand up because of all the weight that's on their chest, or they can just stand up from that position, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Deniz doesn't have the strength of Derek Lewis. I mean, those elbows sliced them up really bad on the ground. So great win for Martin Tybura. And then another knockout win for Ramiz Brahimaj. The first knockout of his entire career. He KOs Mickey Gall in the first round with a combination left hand, right overhand. And the right overhand wasn't like thrown with a lot of leverage, right? It was a short right overhand. Catches Mickey Gall as Gall was moving left, I think. He walked into the punch, which magnifies the impact. KOs him right from there. Ramiz finishes him a ground and pound, which was unnecessary. The referee could have just stopped it right from there. And he gave Joe Rogan our hat. And bro, the fans are flaming our hat. They're calling it foreskin hat. Bro, that's a legendary hat, man. They were wearing that stuff back in the 1400s. I'm not gonna lie though, when people started saying that, I was laughing. I couldn't help but laugh. Foreskin hat is so stupid, but funny. And that's Mickey Gall's fourth loss in a row. I don't know if the UFC is going to keep him around because he was doing pretty well in his last fight with Basil Hafiz, but 4 losses in a row, 2 of them are finishes. How long does Mickey Gall ride on the CM Punk and Sage Northcutt wins, you know? Maybe they keep him around. I would love to see Mickey Gall get another fight, but they might cut him from the UFC. Oban Elliott also getting a knockout against Basil Hafiz. This was crazy, man. Hafiz is always running to the center of the cage, ready to throw down, and he eventually ate an overhand flush to the chin, which knocked him out, right? The fight could have been stopped from there, but Mark Goddard wanted to see more to get some kind of fatality, Mortal Kombat style. Started throwing ground and pound. Basil Hafiz wakes up from his head bouncing off the canvas, and after a few more shots, he gets knocked out again. Bro, he got knocked out twice in the same fight. That should have been a walk-off KO for Oban Elliott. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe to the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.